Hi, everyone. Welcome to this online event with Scandinavian photo and photographer Morten Nordstrøm. Let's see if we have Morten with us. My name is Susanne Holm. I am B2B account manager at Scandinavian Photo, and I will be your host for the next hour. And here we have Morten. Welcome.
Thank you.
With us tonight, we also have two technical experts from Canon, Henrik Svensson and Kalle Mörk. They will be available in the chat to answer any Canon-related questions you may have. You can also write questions to me and Morten if you wish. And now, without further ado, Morten, thank you so much for being with us tonight and sharing your images and wisdoms with us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I've been looking forward to it.
Can you please start by telling us a little bit about yourself? Who are you?
Yes, my name is Morten, and I come from Copenhagen, Denmark. I'm 33 years old, and I've been working as a freelance photographer for 5 years now. And then I have been lucky enough to be appointed as a so-called Canon Nordic photographer, which is also one of the reasons that I'm here, and I'm working with them, in all sorts of ways.
So how did it all begin, and how did you end up as a photographer and where you are today?
Yeah, I think I have always been really fascinated about photography and the whole idea about being able to capture and freeze a moment and then save it forever, because time flies fast and so on. So that has been like something that fascinated me since I was a very little boy. But I didn't really it's not like I grew up and had this idea about I want to be a photographer. I had a lot of ideas, but that wasn't one of them. But then at some point, the mobile phones came with cameras in them. And I remember my wife, she gave me my first smartphone with a camera in it when we got married. And I used it to take photos of just all sorts of ordinary things, places I went and the people I was with and so on. And at some point, I realized that there was ways to share that with others, which was for me Instagram especially, and Facebook and so on. So I joined Instagram in 2012 and started sharing some of my photos there. And some of the things that I shared, all of the things were super duper ugly because I didn't know what I was doing, and I graded everything very heavily in a very not so subtle way. But I wasn't there because I wanted followers. It was just like a nice way to connect with other people. And a lot of people eventually came because I shared all these different things. And I have some of the photos with me actually, just to sort of explain how I got where I am, also photographically. Just try and share my screen here. That's for later. Let me just find the right ones. Here it is. Yeah, so on Instagram, I remember one day there's a street in Copenhagen called Krystalgade, Crystal Street. And when they made the pavement there, they made like a bump, so it was sort of not very well balanced, which made huge puddles. And I had seen somewhere on Instagram somebody doing something like that, taking his camera down to the puddle, take a photo, and I thought it looked like mind-blowing. So I started to experiment with taking photos on the streets, because that was typically when I had my phone on me and the time to just snap a few photos. And I remember still very clearly the first time I shared a so-called puddlegram on my Instagram, because I had like 18 likes or something instead of 4 or whatever I was used to, and a few people saying that it was a really great photo. And I remember I sort of got a kick from it, but also just really nice to hear that people enjoyed what I was sharing with them. So I think that sort of led me to try to experiment and keep on shooting things on the streets and also become a better photographer. And over time, I got still interested in street photography and still am today, but I was getting more and more focused on capturing people on the streets because I felt like some of the photograms and a lot of architectural photography and so on can sometimes there's this pitfall of them becoming a bit soulless, if you could put it like that. Like you have something that's nice and pretty, almost like a postcard, but where's the story? What is it that I'm actually telling with it? And I've found out that when I found someone riding a bike through something like this place, or I've always been fascinated by old people in long trench coats and wearing an umbrella on a rainy day and stuff like that. And people like that also instantly adds some sort of emotion to a photograph. So I became more and more interested in sort of hunting these scenes down. Yeah. And then over time, I sort of realized that this whole thing about taking photographs of people really tells or it speaks a lot to me, and I really enjoyed it. So I started doing more of that kinds of thing. Both like I got hired for stuff, but also tried to launch projects myself and just shoot with friends and people I knew and who wanted to get new photos, and I could get to experiment. So today, all three things, it takes a lot of my time and still something that I really enjoy, but I work more and more with stop sharing. I can do that there. Yeah, but I work a lot with different things, but coming from still photography and today also doing a lot of video. Yeah, but I think overall, yeah, I've been working freelance now for 5 years and doing Instagram since 2012. And it's still for me, I'm not in it for the followers, but to tell stories and share that with others. So that's really, yeah, what I enjoy the most.
But that is quite impressive to become a full-time professional in such a short period of time. So how did you manage to do that?
Yeah, again, it wasn't really like a thing that I had set out to, I want to become a photographer. And I know a lot of people, and probably also some of those who are following along here with us today, they are, and they want to do something similar themselves. But I think for me, it was, I was lucky enough to get a job that I really had dreamt of and not really sure that I could get before in like 10 years from now. So I worked in the music industry with being head of social media and on a big record label here in Denmark. And a lot of the things that my work was centered around was, of course, advising the artists and so on about their digital communication, but also speaking about content and creating content, and go with them making strategies on how to create stuff. And I think that I was there for a little over a year. And in that year, I just realized that every time I go with them on shoots, even if it's not my shoot, I still go there because I need to make behind the scenes stuff. I told everyone at least. But no, it was, of course, it made sense to do it, but I just really realized that I thought that was way more funny than sitting behind the desk and discussing how to use the content, when to use it, and so on. So at that time, that is like 6 years ago now, at that time I had been working a few years before that, just outside of my regular work hours, doing smaller photo assignments and a lot of influencer photography things. And that was like a really nice gateway, I think, to sort of land in that full-time, jumping into the deep end and I hope you can swim. Because that both made me a better photographer before starting, also because I don't have like a formal photography education to lean on. So a lot of practice and also it gives you network and some place to start. So you're not just standing there alone and yelling, "Someone hire me."
That is quite a brave jump. And what would you recommend others who are dreaming of doing the same thing, to leave their desk job and become a full-fledged professional?
Yeah, I think definitely one of the things that I have realized is that I think back when I was like considering, should I do it or shouldn't I remember thinking that, yeah, but it's not really, that wasn't the dream. And also I really like my salary coming in every 30 days and my nice colleagues and friends and so on. So the first period I was a bit nervous all the time, because then you have periods with a lot of work, but you also have periods without any work because you're just starting out of nothing. But what really helped me was that I had been practicing becoming a better photographer and knowing my craft when I started. So the product I was selling was good, and I knew that. But of course, you can always get better. So that's also maybe one of the ways to make sure you stay relevant. But to go back to it, taking some time to actually make sure that you have some sort of plan before starting. Maybe you have a few clients already that you have been doing small assignments for, or you have ideas for projects that could be more long-term, because that's really key. If you can get like just one long-term project, so you know that you can pay your rent or whatever, that makes everything a lot easier. And then I was in the lucky situation that I didn't have a lot of things I had to pay for all the time, because I was living in a cheap place, and I had my wife who was also earning money from a regular day job. So it really had to go very wrong for me to have to go back to my old job. And I think that was a nice starting point, because if you have to jump out in it if you really want to. And I'm not sure that it's a bit like getting kids or something. I'm not sure that there will ever be like a perfect time. You will always be able to come up with something that will hold you back. And of course, you should only do it if you really want to. But I think there's a certain energy also attached to jumping into the deep end and learn how to swim. And you sort of just grow with it. Grab the chances you get and make sure you do your very best, and spread the word once you have done something that you're proud of, so everybody else can see it and hopefully reach out to you to do something similar.
That is quite a story. And possible that passion that you have, that's creating these timeless images, that is your aesthetic profile and the storytelling part of it. So it's quite an impressive story.
Thank you.
But also you started out as a still photographer, but today you work both as a photographer and videographer. So how did you get into video as well? And how do you balance both of them in your work today?
I started out as actually a mobile photographer. And I remember that back then there was also hashtags and a whole community around people who were like only shooting with a mobile phone, because there was like a limitation to that. And it was interesting to see how much could you get out of this small, basically not very good camera, especially back then. But that also meant that I got good at framing and so on, but I didn't know anything about setting things right. Everything was automatic. So when I started out, I just knew that before I went freelance, that I knew, even if I'm not like being a full-time freelancer, if I get an assignment, I need to have like a proper camera to actually solve that. And I need to learn how to use it. So I did, and worked as a still photographer exclusively, also the first year as being a freelancer. And then a little over 4 years ago now, I guess, one of the more long-term clients I had been working with, they told me that they had a production company coming in from Sweden. And it was very expensive and so on. And they didn't really feel like it was a big production, but they still needed video to be done. And I had only been selling them still photography. And I remember just being like, yeah, of course, but you can always just reach out to me next time you need photo or video done. And they were like, yeah, definitely will remember that. And then 2 weeks later or something, my client wrote to me, said, hey Morten, can you help us create videos? And I was like, yeah, sure thing. And then I went to talk with everyone I knew who I had respect for film production wise. I said, what should I do, and how do I solve this the best way? And then I went to YouTube, found Peter McKinnon and Matthew Hapoya and everyone else that did sort of how-tos and so on. And then I just started filming. And at that time, I had a Canon 5DS, which was it was like a high megapixel full frame camera, which is amazing at stills, but not so amazing at producing video. So that was it was a steep learning curve, but again, it felt like actually just repeating that one jump I had already made, jumping into the deep end, and then learn to swim, otherwise you'll drown. So I just practiced and tried to study as much as possible. And I think last year, almost 90% or something of my assignments were purely filmmaking. This year has more been like 50-50, which I enjoy because I really enjoy both stills and filmmaking. But I think it's something actually that is more and more relevant for a lot of different photographers, and not just me. I think I'm just a very good example of someone who has faced this kind of challenge, because I think also as maybe trying to jump out in the deep end and become a freelance photographer yourself, it's always nice to have more than one product on your shelves. And I think a lot of clients today have a very high demand for output. They need like constant content to be produced for their channels, and they need to always be relevant. And most companies at least can't afford big production companies to produce everything for them every time. So they would often need like a smaller scaled company to produce like smaller ongoing content pieces. And I just realized, or I can see in my business, that it's something that there's much less competition about than still photography, because there's a ton of great still photographers out there. And of course there are the same with filmmakers, but a lot of them are just very big and very expensive. So if you can I think I have found like a sweet spot where I can help with or make things more easy for a lot of companies, because I'm flexible and I know how to do both things.
So we have a viewer question on this topic. So you mentioned you practice quite a lot, and we have someone asking, how did you practice to get better at both photography and videography, and how did you monitor your progress?
That's a good question. I think one of the things that I have thought a lot about over the time is that football players, for instance, they practice, if they're professional, every day, so they're ready for the match when they actually when stuff counts. And I think a lot of creative people are not necessarily super great at practicing. We just show up with our cameras on shoot day, and then fingers crossed that I remember everything and stuff will fly. So what I did is I have always been producing a lot of content, just because I feel the urge to take a photo or film something every time I see something I find interesting. But also, if you know that you want to be better at using a gimbal, get that gimbal and use it 30 minutes every day, and at some point you'll be amazing at using a gimbal. And I think for me, I have sort of I spend also quite a lot of time on listening to music and watching music videos and commercials and so on. I find on Instagram and Vimeo and so on from nice directors or production companies and so on. So I always have something that inspires me and that I strive to become as good at as possible, so I can create similar stuff. And I think it's quite easy when you produce continually to at some point see that this is better than what I was able to create some time ago. I have had that experience at least, both with like personal work, but also with clients' work, where I was like, I'm actually, maybe it's not like if you hired a Hollywood film company to do this, but this is way better than the last project I was able to deliver. And there's a lot of satisfaction, of course, to get in that, but also a lot of motivation to keep on improving.
So speaking of inspiration,
Mhm.
how we got another question on that topic. So
Okay.
how do you go out? Do you still go out for finding inspiration on the streets, finding puddles and all?
Yeah, I do. But one of the things that I have realized, because I'm in the very lucky position, I think, that I have a growing business, and also meaning that I'm more busy now than I have been previously as a freelancer. So that gives me less time to go out and actually just do things because I want to do it. But it's also something that in that same matter I've become very aware of, that it's really important for me to actually continue to do stuff like that, because otherwise everything ends up in just delivering things for other people and creating things for other people because that's how they wanted it to be or what they needed. And at some point, I think that was during Corona perhaps, and the whole lockdown situation, I sort of rediscovered the joy of just going out without a real purpose, but with a camera in your hand and just snap whatever crossed my way. And I remember especially one time going to the city for the first time in like 3 months or something, and Copenhagen was like a ghost city. There was almost no people. And I don't have that photo with me here, unfortunately. I would have loved to show it. But I remember I went there and I had this camera, an old analog Canon AE1, and I had that with me. And I went by a tree with some benches below it, and there was this lady sitting there with her bike beside her in the evening sun, just reading her book. And I sort of just stopped actually and looked at her for a moment and took a photo and went on. But I remember that feeling of, because everything felt so new and fresh, like, wow, this was really something special. And I think that's what I really enjoy about photographing in the streets, and still do. That when you have your camera in your hand and you go out there, you're sort of looking for stories, which makes it possible to explore and experience what goes on around you on a different level, I think. And then being able to actually capture and save those moments, and not least also sharing it with others is still something I enjoy. So yeah, I still do, but the puddles, I don't do that much. But it's more because I remember for a long time I was almost battling this whole brand of being, that's the guy who's famous for his puddle brands, because Instagram once wrote an article about it and so on. So I sort of became like a puddle brand photographer, which is quite limiting. But I love playing with the reflections and water and the mood that you can get from a rainy day. Yeah.
Can you please show us some image examples, and also maybe tell us a little bit about your creative process and what gear you use to achieve the story that you want to tell?
Yes, definitely. Well, where to start? I think one of the things that I have gotten more and more types of assignments around is actually doing both stills and video, and often also on the same day. And I think that's like, again, an expression for how big a content output a lot of companies need, but also that they want to have like a tight team and as few as possible to actually create these things for them, and just make sure that there's a red thread through all the stuff that they get created. So my challenge was how do I sort of put together a gear pack that can face both the need of having great photography in high resolutions, which can be printed and so on, and also at the same time have a camera that can use to be both like a quick run and gun film camera, but also something that I could use for longer like short films and so on. So I ended up using the R5 Canon, and on it I have the 28-70 f2.0, which is a truly amazing lens and likewise camera. And I use that combination for the majority of my work, unless I have to be subtle, because it's not a very subtle kit. It's quite big. And before that, I quickly jumped into the EOS R series and used that for both filmmaking and still photography. The R5 is of course great at filming as well, but again, it can be difficult if you're shooting tethered, for instance, to pull everything out and start filming and then pull everything back together, and doing that over and over again through the day quickly gets annoying. And then there's the need for, if you need to shoot like at really high resolutions in a long time, the R5, it doesn't have any blowing system, so it gets heated at some point at least. So I also got this beautiful camera, which is a new cinema camera, or newish cinema camera that Canon made, which is called the C70. I have a top handle on it, so I can quickly sort of, and then with this handle and so on, you can mount all sorts of stuff to it. But the interface of it is very similar to, or almost identical to what you know from a Canon DSLR or a mirrorless. So that makes it really easy to switch between the two. Yeah, and then you have the flexibility to be run and gun, but you can also actually use it as a cinema camera on a real set. And the R5 is an amazing B camera if you choose to do so. So that's, for me, a really strong setup. And maybe let me just show this, which is perhaps my favorite Canon lens, which is the RF 50mm f1.2. So highly recommendable in case anybody wants that. But maybe I should share those photos and a short video just to show some of it. This. So this is a series of photos that I've shot for a company that I'm working with regularly, which is a Nike commercial. And we have this model wearing a new outfit, which they want to share in different platforms. And that's, I think, typical for me. We have like a set location, but not necessarily.
Sorry, Morten, for interrupting you. I don't think we can see your screen that you are sharing.
Ah, really? Let me just, I'm just jumping
now
back.
Now we are looking at you again.
Yeah, I'll just, I'll share my desktop instead, and then I'll just pull it up.
Now we can see.
Can you see now?
Yes.
3 photos? Yes. All right. So I'll just start over again. We have this female model, Monica, and a typical shoot for me, again, for this type of assignment is that I'm both doing one and the other. So just an example of that is these 3 photos that I shot with the R5 and 28-70 2.0. And also maybe just worth noting, because I often also get asked, why would you get the 28-70 instead of the 24-70? Because the 24-70 has image stabilization and so on. But the bokeh on this shot and the quality of it, for me, is more similar to a prime lens, which is fantastic. I think that is actually possible to do today. Whereas the 24-70 is a 2.8 and also an amazing lens without a doubt. But I really enjoy the flexibility in the 28-70 while having that sort of prime look. Yeah, and then there's this film from the same set, which I shot on the C70. I don't think you have audio on it. but it's yeah, you can see a similar setup. And should I use one camera to both of these, I know I wouldn't have been able to create as much in such a short period of time. And then there's the dynamic range on the C70, that you're able to maintain nice shadow details while still not having a blown out sky in the background. That is really key for me, because I think that helps making your work less, I don't know, more professional perhaps, just because you can clearly see that there's the stuff you would expect from a professional assignment, like dynamic range.
Can you describe your typical work process on when you get an assignment, from that you land the assignment until you deliver the product? What is your creative creative process?
Yeah, I think often it's I'm very inspired by a lot of different things, and that of course affects somehow what it is that I dream of creating myself. But often it's either I get approached by a company or an agency who already has like a very specific idea, and maybe they have a mood board as well. So I just sort of get asked, do you want to help out with this? Because we see you as a nice fit for this type of campaign. And then we of course bounce back and forth until we land somewhere where everybody can see themselves in the best possible way. And I think that's really key also, even if you're a startup photographer, that of course you sometimes also need to take on assignments that isn't necessarily the most inspiring or what you have been dreamt of, because you obviously need to get paid to pay your rent as well. But the more you can sort of try to put your own fingerprint on it, the more clear visual language you will also have, which will make it easier to land more work in the future, and also make it much more fun for you to actually create, because it's your work, just your work combined with someone else. And I'm very aware of that. So if I get approached by someone who just has this sort of need of creating photos or video around something without really knowing how it should look and so on, I will typically take some time getting to know them and really understanding what is it that they need, what is it that they want to tell. Sometimes they get sharper on that in that process as well. Either way, I at least do. And then I spend a lot of time on creating mood boards, planning locations, also thinking about the time of day we'll shoot in, because nobody wants to have the photo taken in harsh sunlight at noon, because you'll just have these panda eyes, shadows, and everything will look very harsh. So really try to stitch something together that like tells a whole story. And then there's of course still the thing about you can't plan everything, because sometimes things go wrong, or you had planned for something that you thought would be amazing, and then when you're standing there on set, it just doesn't really work. And I think one of the gifts that I had taken from me or with me from the street photography really is that I'm able to sort of just come up with something where I'm at, because I have trained so much getting a lot out of a very little. And I think again, practice makes champion in some ways, because you can of course plan a lot, but being able to really see the opportunities and use them to something beneficial is a great way to just do it as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do things, and sometimes it's really just rock and roll, and other times it's very planned, but I enjoy them both. Yeah, I think that's it.
All right. Do you want to hear some viewer questions before we have a look at some more pictures?
Yes.
All right. So we have one question. What is your favorite video camera for inside? I'm guessing that means indoors.
Yeah. I think basically I really feel like the Canon C70 is an amazing video camera, because the form factor, it feels like having a 1DX in your hand, if the questionnaire knows that. So it's really easy to handle, and it's really easy to navigate if you know your way around things. And then you have built-in ND filters and can easily set white balance and so on. So also coming indoors with, let's say, tungsten light, you can map out everything and really make sure that you're on point in what you do. And then you can always, of course, scale up. Like the C500 Mark II is obviously a crazy camera. But if you don't need to shoot things in RAW and so on, shooting C70 and C-Log 2 or 3 4K is also really an amazing picture profile to work with in post. And maybe also should I add that I know that the R5, I used that before I got the C70 to videography, and that's amazing as well. And I have tried the R6, also a great camera, and actually the EOS R. If you, I used it for quite some time with a recorder on it, an Atomos Ninja 5, which was sort of a hack that allowed you to record a 4K 24p in 10-bit, which is a lot more than most traditional full-frame cameras are capable of.
So this actually brings us. This actually brings us to the next question quite perfectly. So the EOS R5, as you mentioned, is an amazing professional camera. But now we have a question: what camera would you recommend for a new beginner who wants to learn both film and still photography?
Yeah, that is also a great question. I think that there's like two things to consider in that, perhaps, and one of them is definitely, of course, which camera serves the need, and also within the budget frame. Because if you're just starting out, you're probably not looking to spend 20,000 or something on a camera house. But then there's also the lens mount, because one of the things, I have my very first camera. This is the first camera that I ever bought, and as I told you, Susanna, it's a 500D, and I bought it used. So it's maybe the cheapest camera Canon has produced, or at least one of them. And I bought it used because I didn't have a lot of money to spend on cameras. And I wouldn't recommend it if you want to create movies. But for still photography, that was actually amazing, because you suddenly had that depth of field that I never had before on a mobile phone, for instance. And I was able to practice shooting manually, choosing my own aperture, choosing my own shutter speed and ISO. So something like that is really amazing. But maybe something else that could work is this one, which I have from a previous campaign with the Canon, and that is a Canon EOS M50. There's a Mark II version of this, which recently came out, which is also really nice. But this is a great camera. I think, if I recall it right, it shoots video at 4K, and it has built-in image stabilization, so you don't need a lot of breaking up for shooting. And it takes great photos as well. The only thing to consider is that and one of the reasons I bought the small Canon DSLR was that I knew that the lens mount is the EF mount, which is at that time, all the greatest Canon lenses was with that lens mount. So I knew that I was able to buy this camera and the lenses I needed, and I would always be able to continue on using the same. And that's something I still think about, that it's really a pity to have a lens that you love, and then you buy a new camera and suddenly it doesn't fit. Then there's, of course, adapters and so on. So that solves a lot as well. But yeah, the M50 is definitely a nice camera for both, and has some nice lenses as well. And I think we have some product experts with us as well, so maybe they can help clarifying. But I remember as if you can buy a lens adapter So you can actually put an EF lens on your M50. And if so, you would be able to get a really strong camera and a very compact body and put a very nice lens on it, which you would always be able to use if you decide to buy a bigger body someday.
Those actually do exist, and you can buy them at this really great camera shop I've heard of called Scandinavian Photo.
Ah, amazing.
So I just have to tell you, we got this amazing comment from one of our viewers saying, I still use your first camera in 2021, haha.
Amazing, but it is great, it really is. And I actually, I picked it up earlier today just because I knew I wanted to show it because it really has a special place in my heart. And unfortunately, there's no power on it, so I have to find the charger because I was like, I need to take a photo with this. It's a very nostalgic thing, but it's still a great camera.
And another question that I found very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the question. I'm quite shy about taking photos of strangers in the streets. Do people ever get annoyed with you taking pictures of them?
Yeah. I can absolutely relate to that. And I think part of that is actually the reason why I ended up taking photos of people I knew, because I have always felt a bit uncomfortable about it as well. And I think there's like two schools within street photography, where one of them is really like, like a documentary approach, where you feel like you're on the street and it's public space and you're allowed to take these photos because you're documenting and so on, and it serves a greater purpose. And I can totally respect that, but I have always, like, personally, I wouldn't like it if somebody just came out of nothing with a big camera and shoved it up my face and I didn't know what he wanted to use the photo for and so on. So for that reason, I have always felt a bit uncomfortable trying to do the same. So sometimes I have just sort of sneaky, didn't see me coming there. And other times I have tried shooting from behind. And I've done that a lot, actually. I remember a few friends joking with me because sometimes we were standing on the street drinking coffee and someone walked by, and I always have my camera on me, and I was like, wow, that person looks amazing. And then I just started following that person and for some time, and it must have looked super creepy, but the person didn't know, so it was okay. And when they realized it, I was just, yeah, sorry, I'm not doing anything. But I think you have to respect people's boundaries, of course. And if there's like a recognizable face, I have most of the times, at least, asked if I knew this is a photo I might want to use for something. I usually ask, are you okay with this? I think there's also, it depends on how you shoot it. If people look pretty in it, I think it's way easier to get away with it. But yeah, it's definitely not easy, but it's also part of growing personally, I think, getting out of your comfort zone.
So I have another quite challenging viewer question for you. Mm-hmm. And maybe you can answer it with some image examples.
Yeah.
So the question is, what do you see as the greatest challenge for still photos versus videography in preserving your own aesthetic photography profile?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, can I show you? I don't know. I think one of the biggest challenges, at least, is that I have for quite some time been used to always shooting my still photos vertically, because that's how you would typically show them on Instagram, because that's how you sort of experience the feed. And when you shoot videos, you would typically shoot horizontally. So that challenge of suddenly, it's like you're seeing the world with a new set of glasses or something, which can be both confusing, but also a bit harder to sort of frame things up because you're used to framing differently. But I feel like that challenge has been really great for me, because that forces you again out of your comfort zone and to experiment. And it has also meant that I've started taking more still photos horizontally. And maintaining style, I'm not sure I have anything like right off my desktop that I can show you. Then I would have to pick up some hard drives and show. But I think there's a lot in the editing, definitely, that you can edit video to look similar to what you would typically do with a grade on your still photos. And then there's the whole way of shooting, where I think a lot of my still photography is typically not necessarily minimalistic, but I don't tend to have a lot in my frames. I like when things are like easy to digest and there's a clear focus, a specific thing, and not a lot of things happening. And that I have taken with me into my filmmaking. That I try to sort of create the same scenes. It's just alive, so to say. Yeah, but it is a great challenge, definitely. But I think, again, if you do it regularly, you also get better at it, because it doesn't feel like working with your left hand, but just doing it as you usually do, but in a different way.
So the next question we got is, can you show us your current favorite photo and tell us the meaning behind it?
My current favorite photo, like is it do you think it's one of my own favorite photos?
I would presume so, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That's a really difficult question, because sometimes I think most of the people who are following along probably know that or feel the same way. But when you take a photo and you look at it a lot of times, you can easily end up being a bit like, not necessarily tired of it, but the thing that really spoke to you when you took it, or something similar, it just sort of it's not the same after some time. But maybe let me show you. I think I can do that. Find the photo that I talked about previously, of that woman who was sitting under a bench, or under a tree on a bench, because I remember I have shared that on my Instagram. Yeah, and actually I can't. Let me show you another thing which is, I can't do that either. It's because I'm not logged on. But maybe let me just share my screen, and then you can see like the big picture, at least from when you go to see my Instagram. You can see this, right? Yeah, what I wanted to show you was this photo right here, which is a typical example of me hunting down someone I thought looked amazing on the street. And it's I don't know, 3 years ago or something. And I'm pretty sure it shot on the 50mm 1.2 because of that amazing bokeh. But it's a guy that I had, we went the same way, like by coincidence. And then I just slowed down a bit. I took photos of him from behind, and a lot of them is just him from the back with his head, and that sort of silhouette I thought was really nice, especially on a high f-stop like this, where you really separate him from everything around him. And then at some point he suddenly stopped, and he actually stopped to look at cameras. It's a camera store on the left. Unfortunately not a Scandinavian photo, because there wasn't anyone on anything in Copenhagen at that time. But and then I took this photo of him before I moved on, because I figured he would probably look at me in a second, and then I would have this awkward moment with him. But I don't know, I sometimes look at it, and that's the reason why I shared it again, because it's a few years ago I shared it the first time. And when I look at it, I'm thrown right back to that moment, and I can almost see myself in him. Like I dream of being, but I dream of the time when I'm 70 years old, hopefully just walking a trip down my favorite street, stopping to look at all those cameras I can't afford, and just have a nice day and moment, and then move on. I really feel like I captured that, and I still enjoy that photo for that reason.
I have to tell you, the chat is now receiving a lot of compliments for you about amazing photos.
Thanks so much.
So if you don't mind, please continue to show us some from your Instagram and tell us more about the story behind them.
Yeah, definitely. The only thing is that I'm not logged in on this browser because I typically use my mobile phone for that. So I can't really go much further, but maybe, yeah. This is actually a great example of very recently when I was in the city and I didn't plan to take a photo, but I had my camera with me and walked by this harbor front on a corner near a place called Nyhavn, which is quite touristy, but on the back side of it, it's way more spacious and nice perhaps for some people. And I just knew this will make a great photo, so I stood there for, I don't know, a minute or so, and then how these two are lined up and this bird flying in and so on. And that's when I snapped the photo, and that, I think that's a good example of the reason why I chose to use this photo instead of the one I had shot 30 seconds before is because of that bird, basically, because that adds, for me at least, some sort of both like there's a speed in it, almost like a video. You can see something moving, and a touch of nature right here in this concrete sort of jungle. And there's it adds a little balance as well on the right side of the frame with this very heavy bottom and left side. So that's some of my thoughts behind it. And then there's this, which is also something that a few years ago I didn't really shoot much of, and also something I would never share on my Instagram because it wasn't a puddle and it wasn't something taken on the streets, but indoors. That typically doesn't perform as well, likewise on my account. But I think with time I've become better to share the things that I like and not necessarily the things I think other people like. And also stay calm about it and know that it's a great photo, and maybe it's not everybody who thinks it's like-worthy, and that's okay because people are different, but it's still a great photo. So this is shot on a movie set. Actually, we were recording like a short film for a Danish company called Louis Poulsen, who produces lamps. This one as well. So I was actually only there to do film stuff, filming, and then I took this photo. And actually, I know now, I remember that I have on my desktop, I have a few screenshots from, let me just find it there. Screenshots from this production. So that might be nice actually for you guys to see. So this is from the same place, and this is just a screen grab from the C70. So yeah, this is the set, and we have just packed up in this end, and I started shooting from the other end, and it was about sharing all this amazing furniture and design and talking about some stories behind that and meet the designers and so on. And this is really, again, as I said, me trying to create something that, because there's happening a lot in this frame, but I'm trying to use the symmetry line here in the middle to sort of clean up the frame and make sure that everything is clean and tidy. And also just a great example of being able to pull out files like this from a movie camera is just really amazing, I think.
Can you give some recommendation on what things to avoid?
To avoid when
to
filming,
get great photos, I would think.
Yeah.
So we have a comment asking, do you grade your photos? And can you share some tips or things how to avoid?
Yeah, okay. Yes, I do grade my photos. I shoot everything in RAW. And I remember when I started, I didn't know that there was anything called RAW, so I just shot JPEGs. And basically, when you shoot JPEG, your camera try to sort of pack something that is nice and ready to go. When you shoot RAW, you have all the possibilities in the world to set post-production wise and tweak the photo or video to end up where you want it to be. So I started doing that as soon as I realized how much more there was to work with. So I really enjoy editing, actually, because I feel like that's, for me, it's a nice way to sort of dive into my work, and also really where I set the tone for where I want this to end up. You can create a lot of mood in editing as well. So should this feel like, I don't know, should it have a melancholic vibe, or should it be warm and so on? And I think that's really nice that you're able to create so much in post-production.
And you just
so
got the
maybe,
response from a viewer. I promise to shoot raw from now on.
Yeah, do so. And also maybe remember that RAW files take up more space than JPEGs, because I went to a shoot starting RAW, and then I realized that my, I don't know, 32 gigabyte card quickly got filled while I was on set, and I didn't bring an extra because that was typically enough for me. But luckily my office was in the same building, so just like an extra tip. Yeah.
All right. Well, I have one more question for you. And this one comes from me, actually. Have you visited our new shop in Copenhagen, since Scandinavian Photo opened a shop in Copenhagen today?
Yeah, I actually haven't, but I received the newsletter, so I got the message today, which is, I think personally, and I know of course we're sitting here for Scandinavian Photo and so on, but I really think that is great, and also maybe about time, because coming from Denmark, I have always enjoyed Scandinavian Photo and figured, why isn't it in Denmark when it's like this big chain and it's Scandinavian and so on. So I'm definitely stopping by as soon as possible and saying hi.
Yeah, you're very welcome. It's close to the Carlsberg area in Copenhagen.
Yeah, I read. It's actually also a nice area, I think, also photographically speaking, because it used to be like where we have this Carlsberg brewing company. They used to have it all just to brew, and so you have all these old buildings which are amazing, and now they're doing it into something completely different with people living in it and so on. So it's probably also a place where you're able to experience very new things and capture this contrast between new and old and so on.
So time flies when you're having fun. We've already been here for 1 hour. Do you have time for 2 quick questions, and then we'll round it off?
Definitely.
So the first one is, what's the best advice you have received as a creator?
Yeah, I think actually it's an advice that I have gotten, which was in regards to training, working out, which was one of my friends who said the best workout is the one that actually gets done. And I remember that sort of stuck inside of my brain, because I have a tendency to, I know that I want to work out, but I need at least 1 or 2 hours to do it properly. So sometimes I won't do it because I only have like 30 minutes. And then that ends up with me not doing anything at all. And I think I have at least personally translated that into my own work, because sometimes also with personal projects, you can end up with having this idea about you want to shoot this particular thing. But I need to go to Iceland to shoot epic landscapes. No, you don't. There's probably something else very nice nature-wise right in your backyard. You just have to do it. And then someday you'll be able to go there where you dream of and so on. But I think personally, I have a tendency to use that as like, it's all or nothing. And I think there's a lot to gain if you decide to also just do things sometimes, even if it's not all, because there's still a lot of value in it.
Yeah, that's very, very wise words from you. So final question. How do you view the perfect composition? What is your opinion on that?
The perfect composition. That's also like a very amazing question in many ways, and very hard to answer, I think. But definitely, I think when I was just starting out and didn't know anything about photography, what really caught my eye on the streets was typically either shooting directly up at something like a building or through a street. And when I shot buildings, I would typically look for some sort of lines that made the whole image balanced. And when I shot down through the streets, what really intrigued me was the leading lines and the very like narrow ending point in the middle of it all. And I think today those two are still great examples of great compositions, but I also think that maybe they're a bit too one-dimensional or too easy in some way, because it's of course nice, but it's just like one thing that really characterizes the framing. So I think today I look more for using something in my foreground, middle ground, and background, because then you have this sort of depth in the field that both is naturally interesting to look at, but also much more challenging to shoot with. But it's also a nice memory rule, because you can sometimes stand somewhere and let's say you're taking photos of a person and you feel like this is a pretty picture, but it's maybe a bit boring frame. Try get something in the foreground that sort of breaks apart the subject from the very foreground of the image. And suddenly you have a much more interesting frame. So I think a perfect composition, I don't know if I have the recipe to that, but something that is seeking the boundaries and not necessarily following the school rules without being over the edge, of course.
Thank you so much, Morten, for all your insights and sharing your story with us and your images. And you have received a lot of compliments in the chat.
Yeah.
So, and thank you everyone for, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight for this event. And please keep an eye on Scandinavian Photo websites. We have Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, where you can keep track of more upcoming events. And please do visit our new shop in Copenhagen. We also have shops in Malmö, Borås, Stockholm, and Oslo. And you can always find us via our website. And that's, I think, all from us. Thank you very much, Morten.
Thank you very much, both you and Scandinavian Photo, and not least to all the people who took an hour or whatever time out of their evening to spend it with us and listen to us talking. I really appreciate that, not least the compliments and the great questions. That's amazing. So thank you all. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you all very much, and have a very nice evening. See you soon.
You too. Yes. Bye.